A yogurt. 36 hours to ferment. Almost no equipment. Here's why it matters. Researchers have connected it to resolving SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, the condition that leaves people bloated, told there's nothing really wrong. It's one recipe on this list. Most of us don't take care of our gut. A probiotic pill, a spoonful of yogurt. That's it. Our grandparents didn't do it that way. 100 years ago, something fermented sat on the table at almost every meal. Sauerkraut next to dinner. Something tangy and alive with breakfast. Pickled vegetables, not a garnish. The point, it wasn't a wellness trend. It was just food. Before refrigeration, it was how you kept food edible. Researchers at King's College London studied what fermented foods actually do to the gut microbiota. The conclusion wasn't vague. Measurable, mechanistic effects on gastrointestinal health. Real shifts in the bacteria lining your digestive tract, tied to specific foods. Most people skip fermented food. Acquired taste, weird smell, feels like a lab project. That reputation isn't earned. Some of these recipes take 5 minutes of hands-on effort. The fermentation does the work while you sleep. I'm not a doctor. I've spent 2 years fermenting things in my kitchen out of curiosity, and a gut that used to hate me. This isn't medical advice. It's the research, filtered through what's worked for me. Jars broken and all. Here's what's coming. Fermented foods, each one backed by a specific study, each one with a full recipe you can start today. Vegetables, dairy, soy, even hot sauce. Everything you need to know what to put in your cart tonight. Let's start with the one that surprised me the most. Fair warning, this one isn't your average tub of yogurt from the store situation. This is homemade. It ferments for a day and a half, and the smell alone will make you question your life choices around hour 20. Recipe. Combine 1/2 gallon of whole milk. Avoid ultra-pasteurized. The higher heat processing damages the proteins the bacteria need to feed on, with 10 crushed 100 billion CFU reuteri tablets and 2 to 4 tablespoons of inulin powder or potato starch as a prebiotic fuel source. Whisk thoroughly, pour into a sanitized glass container. Hold at a steady 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 36 hours using a yogurt maker, an oven with just the light on, or a slow cooker on its lowest setting with the lid cracked. Do not stir or disturb it during fermentation. When it's ready, it should have thickened slightly and smell pleasantly sour, like yogurt's tangier, more assertive cousin. Refrigerate for at least 8 hours before eating. It thickens further as it chills. Never use metal utensils or containers during fermentation. The acidity can react with aluminum specifically. Here's the mechanism in plain language. Regular yogurt uses bacterial strains that are decent gut colonizers but don't stick around long. Lactobacillus reuteri is different. Think of it less like a guest passing through and more like a tenant that actually signs the lease. It's a strain your gut recognizes and can host long-term, and researchers studying SIBO have specifically looked at L. reuteri's ability to interact with gut motility and bacterial balance in the small intestine, the exact zone where SIBO causes problems. The specific method, using crushed L. reuteri probiotic tablets, inulin as a food source for the bacteria, and a long, low fermentation of around 36 hours, was developed and popularized because standard yogurt fermentation times, usually 6 to 8 hours, aren't long enough for L. reuteri to multiply to a therapeutic density. The extended time is the entire point. I made my first batch in a slow cooker set to the lowest possible setting with the lid propped open with a wooden spoon, because I didn't own a yogurt maker and wasn't about to buy one before I knew if I'd even like the stuff. I checked it 4 times that first night, like a nervous new parent. By hour 30, it had this faint tang, almost like a mild goat cheese, and I remember standing in my kitchen at midnight, spoon in hand, genuinely nervous to try it. This one has a texture and a smell that takes people by surprise the first time. Sour, a little funky, with a crunch that somehow survives weeks of fermentation. It is not subtle, and that's exactly why it works. Think of kimchi as a controlled ecosystem in a jar. The salt in the initial brine draws water out of the cabbage and creates an environment hostile to the bacteria that cause spoilage. while creating perfect conditions for lactic acid bacteria to move in and take over. The same friendly family of bacteria found in yogurt, just adapted to vegetables instead of milk. Clinical sources reviewing leaky gut and intestinal permeability have specifically flagged fermented vegetables like kimchi as foods that support the repair of the gut lining, largely because the lactic acid bacteria produced during fermentation help regulate the tight junctions between intestinal cells, the microscopic seals that, when compromised, are what leaky gut actually refers to. My first attempt at kimchi went sideways almost immediately. I packed the jar too full, didn't realize it needed room to bubble and expand, and woke up 2 days later to brine all over my counter and my cat sniffing suspiciously at the mess. I laughed, mopped it up, and started over with a jar half the size of what I thought I needed. Second batch was perfect. Recipe: cut 1 large Napa cabbage into rough 2-inch pieces, massage with a 1/4 cup of sea salt, and let sit for 1 to 2 hours until the leaves go limp and release liquid. Rinse briefly and drain. Make a paste from 2 tablespoons of Korean chili flakes, gochugaru, 4 minced garlic cloves, 1 tablespoon grated ginger, 1 tablespoon fish sauce or soy sauce for a vegan version, and 1 teaspoon sugar. Massage this paste into the cabbage along with 1 bunch of chopped scallions and 1 shredded carrot. Pack tightly into a jar, leaving 2 inches of headspace for expansion, and press down until brine covers the vegetables. Leave at room temperature, loosely covered, for 3 to 7 days, burping the jar daily to release gas. Taste at day 3. It's ready when it's tangy and slightly effervescent, not when it tastes fresh anymore. Move to the fridge, where it will keep improving for months. This is the one with a reputation problem. Most people picture a sad, vinegary jar from the grocery store and assume that's the whole story. Homemade sauerkraut is a completely different food, and the science behind it is more specific than most people realize. Picture your intestinal lining as a brick wall, with the cells acting as bricks and tight junctions acting as the mortar holding them together. When that mortar breaks down, things that shouldn't get through, undigested particles, toxins, bacterial fragments, start leaking into your bloodstream, triggering inflammation. That's the barrier researchers are talking about when they discuss intestinal permeability. Researchers publishing in an ASM, American Society for Microbiology journal, studied the metabolome of fermented cabbage, essentially the full chemical fingerprint of everything produced during fermentation, and tested it directly against Caco2 cell monolayers, a lab model used to simulate the human intestinal barrier. They found that compounds produced during cabbage fermentation offered measurable protection against cytokine-induced disruption of that barrier, meaning the fermented cabbage metabolites actively defended the mortar against inflammatory attack in a controlled lab setting. I let my first jar of sauerkraut sit on top of my fridge for 3 weeks and genuinely forgot about it, which turned out to be the best possible thing I could have done. When I finally opened it, the smell hit me before I even got the lid fully off. Sharp, sour, alive in a way that store-bought kraut has never once smelled to me. I ate it straight out of the jar standing at the counter, which felt a little unhinged, but also felt like exactly the right way to eat something that patient. Recipe: shred 1 medium green cabbage thinly, reserving 1 outer leaf. Weigh the shredded cabbage and add sea salt at 2% of that weight, roughly 1.5 tablespoons per 2-pound cabbage. Massage the salt into the cabbage for 5 to 10 minutes until it releases enough liquid to pool at the bottom of the bowl. Pack tightly into a clean jar, pressing until the brine rises above the cabbage. Use the reserved outer leaf, folded as a cap, to keep shreds submerged, weighted down with a small fermentation weight or a clean rock. Cover loosely, never airtight. It needs to release gas, and leave at room temperature, out of direct sunlight, for 2 to 4 weeks. Taste weekly starting at week 2. It's ready when it's tangy, slightly fizzy on the tongue, and the cabbage has gone translucent rather than bright green. If anything pink, black, or fuzzy appears on top, discard the batch. A thin white film, calm yeast, is harmless and can be skimmed off. This one comes with a mascot problem before it even comes with a flavor. The culture you need to keep it alive, called a SCOBY, looks without exaggeration like something out of a horror movie. Rubbery, pale, faintly veined. It scares off more people than the taste ever does. Here's the mechanism, made simple. A SCOBY is a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast, and the two work like a relay team. The yeast eats the sugar first and produces alcohol. Then the bacteria immediately eat that alcohol and convert it into organic acids. The end result is a drink that started sweet and finishes tart, carrying trace B vitamins and a modest probiotic population along with it, all produced by that one strange-looking disc sitting quietly in your jar. Beginner brewing guides built around dedicated equipment, like a fermentation vessel with a built-in spigot and strainer, exist specifically because the two biggest points of failure for new brewers are controlling airflow during the first ferment and bottling safely for carbonation during the second. Both problems purpose-built gear solves in one step, no cheesecloth or improvised setups required. My SCOBY sat untouched in a cabinet for 4 months after I panic-ordered it online during a stressful week and then completely lost my nerve. When I finally worked up the courage to start it, it smelled like vinegar and bread, which I'd read was normal, but still didn't fully believe until I tasted the first batch, and it was, against every expectation, actually good. Recipe: brew 4 cups of strong black or green tea with 1 cup of sugar dissolved in while hot, then cool completely to room temperature. Adding the SCOBY to warm tea will kill it. Pour into a gallon glass jar along with the SCOBY and 1 cup of starter liquid from a previous batch, or unflavored store-bought kombucha if this is your first. Cover with a tight weave cloth secured by a rubber band, never a sealed lid, and set it somewhere out of direct sunlight for 7 to 14 days. Taste starting at day 7 with a straw. It's ready when it's tart with barely any sweetness left, smelling pleasantly vinegary rather than sharp or off. For carbonation, bottle it with a splash of fruit juice, seal airtight, and leave at room temperature for 2 to 3 more days before refrigerating. Never use a metal container or lid in direct contact with the liquid. The acidity reacts with it. This is the one that intimidates people the most. And understandably, you're not just souring something, you're growing a living mold culture on soybeans and calling it dinner. The first time you see tempeh mid-ferment, laced with white filaments binding the beans together, it looks less like food and more like a science experiment that got left in a drawer. That's actually the closest thing to an accurate description, and that's the whole point. Tempeh is made by inoculating cooked soybeans with Rhizopus mold spores, and the mold's root-like filaments, called mycelium, physically bind the individual beans into a solid cake, while its enzymes break down some of the soybean's proteins and fats into simpler, far more digestible compounds. Think of the mycelium as a tiny construction crew that spends a day and a half quietly pre-digesting your dinner for you before it ever hits a pan. Traditional guides on soy fermentation emphasize that this process was developed over centuries, specifically because raw or simply cooked soy is difficult for a lot of people to digest and can interfere with mineral absorption. The fermentation isn't a flavor choice, it's a digestibility solution refined by generations of trial and error, long before anyone understood the microbiology behind why it worked. I ruined my first batch of tempeh completely. Used soybeans that were slightly too wet after cooking, and instead of the clean white mycelium I was expecting, I got patches of black and gray mold spots that meant the whole thing had to go straight in the trash. I nearly gave up on tempeh entirely after that, convinced I'd somehow get it wrong every time. My second attempt, with beans dried thoroughly on a towel for a full hour before inoculating, came out perfect. Dense, nutty, and startlingly white. Recipe: cook 2 cups of dried soybeans until just tender, then dry thoroughly on a clean towel for at least an hour. Excess surface moisture is the single biggest cause of failed batches. Once fully cool and dry to the touch, mix in 1 teaspoon of tempeh starter culture, Rhizopus oligosporus spores, and 2 tablespoons of vinegar to lower the pH and discourage contaminating bacteria. Pack into a perforated plastic bag or banana leaf parcel, poking holes roughly every inch for airflow, and press flat to about 3/4 of an inch thick. Incubate at 85-90 degrees Fahrenheit for 24 to 36 hours, ideally in an oven with just the interior light on for warmth. It's done when it's bound into a firm, sliceable cake, covered in white mycelium with a faint mushroom smell, and no black, gray, or pink patches. Any of those colors mean discard and restart, no exceptions. Last one, and it might be the easiest sell of the entire list, because it doesn't ask you to change your diet. It asks you to change your condiment. The mechanism here is nearly identical to sauerkraut, just with a spicier cast of characters. Chili peppers submerged in a salt brine create the same low-oxygen, salt-tolerant environment that favors lactic acid bacteria over anything harmful. And those bacteria produce the same organic acids and probiotic compounds found in kraut and kimchi, just carried in a pourable, spoonable form that's easy to add to literally anything you're already eating. Producers and food writers focused specifically on fermented hot sauce point to it as one of the lowest effort entry points into fermented eating, precisely because you're not restructuring a meal around it. You're adding a tablespoon to eggs, tacos, or soup, and getting the same digestive benefits as a much larger serving of kraut or kimchi, just concentrated and delivered in a format most people already reach for daily anyway. I started fermenting hot sauce almost by accident, with a bag of jalapenos that were about to go bad and a jar I wasn't using for anything else. I didn't weigh anything the first time, just eyeballed the salt, and the batch came out so aggressively salty it was nearly undrinkable, even diluted. I learned fast that the 2% rule isn't optional. It's the difference between a sauce you actually want to eat and a science experiment you quietly pour down the drain. Recipe: roughly chop 1 pound of fresh chili peppers, jalapeno, serrano, or a mix, 2 garlic cloves, and 1 small onion. Weigh the mixture and add sea salt at 2% of that weight. Massage lightly and pack into a jar, pressing to submerge everything under its own released liquid. Add a splash of filtered water if needed to fully cover. Weight down with a fermentation weight. Cover loosely, and ferment at room temperature for 1 to 2 weeks, burping daily. It's ready when it smells sharply sour rather than simply hot peppers, with visible small bubbles when you tap the jar. Blend the entire contents, brine included, with a splash of vinegar to stabilize the pH for shelf storage, and strain if you prefer a smoother sauce. Store in the fridge, where it will keep improving for months. A single spoonful of something this small, added to a meal you were already going to eat anyway, might be the easiest gut-healing habit on this entire list to actually keep. That's the full lineup. A probiotic yogurt with real clinical backing for SIBO. Kimchi built to repair the gut lining. Sauerkraut with a laboratory-tested defense of your intestinal barrier. Kombucha for daily probiotic diversity. Tempeh for a gentler way to eat soy. And a fermented hot sauce you can pour onto anything without changing a single meal you were already planning to eat. None of these require a lab, a culinary degree, or a spare $1,000 in equipment. Every single one of them started, for me, as a mess. Spilled brine, a ruined batch, a jar I was too nervous to open for months. The research backs the benefits, but the only thing that actually determines whether any of this works for you is whether you start 1 jar this week. Pick the one that scared you the least while you were watching this. Start there.